The Iran-Israel-US war is hurtling towards its conclusion due to this massive development. Here's what's going on. So soon after the US and Israel completed their joint strike on Iran, the ongoing Middle East war has somewhat spiraled out of control. We've seen how Iran has attacked its Gulf Arab neighbors. We've also seen how the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked and global oil supplies are in actual danger. And something else is that we've seen how another confrontation has opened up along the Israel-Lebanon border, where Israel and Hezbollah have been fighting one another. But even as it seems as if this conflict is getting bigger and bigger, in actual fact, it could be heading towards its conclusion pretty soon, with a victor already in sight. But before we get into it, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It's entirely free and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you would like to enjoy some additional benefits and support the channel, you can do so by becoming a Power Club member. Do this by clicking on the join button below the video. Now let's get started. So I've written an article for IntelliNews detailing a massive development in the ongoing war. And if this development proves to be correct, it could be the turning point in the war, whereby a victor is all but decided if things keep going the way they are. So, as explained in this article, Israeli military officials reported that Iran's security establishment has been severely weakened, showing signs of rapid deterioration in coordination and motivation. This comes as Israeli and US forces continue their joint operation against the Iranian establishment. So, just to provide a little bit of context, I explained here how pretty soon after the war started on February the 28th, just a few days later, the IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, had a press conference where he explained that basically the first phase of the war had already been completed. So Israel had succeeded in greatly suppressing Iran's ballistic missile arsenal and also disabling a lot of their missile launches. And so this was quite important. And because of that, they were able to move on to the next phase of operations, which is basically damaging the regime's capabilities directly. And as he explained, striking the foundations of the regime and its military capabilities. Now, what's also important to note is that in the days that followed, it seems as if this sort of crack in the Iranian chain of command really started to show. And the reason I say this is because Israel started to hit some very important, if not crucial, infrastructure for the IRGC, the Iranian regime. So on March the 1st, the IDF destroyed Iran's General Staff Headquarters for Internal Security, as well as the Tharala headquarters, which functioned as a defense command center in Tehran. Fast forward to March the 6th, we see how the IDF announced the destruction of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's underground military bunker in central Tehran. Now, of course, he'd already been eliminated at this point, but it is quite significant to note that even his underground bunker was gone, let alone the presidential palace. This was then followed by an IDF attack on the IRGC Air Force headquarters during a broad range of strikes on March the 9th. And so it's very important to note how basically all this crucial infrastructure is all gone. And so the military leadership really does seem to have been dismantled. So, as one of the sources explained, it is important to understand that Iran is a huge country. There are many commands. Some fire more and some fire less, and we are seeing the decline in motivation. One military official told Yediot Aronot. Now, Yediot Aronot is an Israeli newspaper. There are still many military industries left to strike, but the regime's ability to carry out offensive operations as an army has been dramatically damaged. So, of course, when they're talking about firing, they're talking about the ballistic missiles. And as explained here, some areas they're able to fire more, others less. But the main thing is that there's this declining motivation amongst the soldiers' ranks, and that it seems that Israel and the United States have done very well to severely deplete Iran's ability to continue firing missiles. So, if we take a look here, there's some very important data, and it explains that there's a significant uptick in Israel's attacking tempo compared to the 12-day war, which was fought in 2025. So according to Israeli Air Force data, it showed that approximately 3,400 targets were struck during Operation Roaring Lion, compared to 900 targets over 12 days in the previous operation. So the Americans have called it Operation Epic Fury. Roaring Lion is the Israeli name, but it still refers to the current conflict. The US separately reported destroying over 5,000 Iranian targets since the war began. Israeli forces have dropped more than 10,000 munitions and conducted about 4,200 sorties into Iran, compared with 3,700 munitions and 1,500 sorties in Operation Rising Lion. And so this already shows a massive uptick compared to the 2025 12-day war. About 40 senior Iranian officials have been killed versus 30 in the earlier campaign. So what's actually also very interesting here, apart from this massive uptick in US and Israeli operations compared to 2025, is how Iran's strike capabilities have been massively depleted, even at the very beginning of the specific war, when compared to the 12-day conflict in 2025. So it explains here that military assessments suggest that approximately 250 Iranian missiles have been fired since the operation began, which is around half of the roughly 500 missiles launched during the 2025. Precise launch figures remain under military censorship, but Israeli officials indicated that they were unconvinced the reduced fire resulted from a deliberate Iranian strategy. So they're probably talking about as if there was a strategy to conserve their arsenal, spread the war out. They believe that according to their intelligence, this isn't the case and that Iran just simply does not have the firepower that they had before. Now, this entire situation is quite notable, and it's for a very important reason. You see, while it's difficult to obviously predict the future, what one needs to understand is that there's a very big parallel being drawn between Iran right now and Hamas after October the 7th, so the Gaza war. And what that is that there's been a massive crackdown in the military security establishment, if we can call it that, and the leadership capabilities of, well, the Iranian leadership. And this is something similar to what Israel did to Hamas. Remember, on October the 7th and the days following, Hamas had a very strong leadership and they had very good communication and coordination throughout the organization. And that's why they were able to overwhelm Israel. Remember, in addition to the actual ground invasion of Israeli territory, they also fired thousands, if not tens of thousands of missiles on October the 7th, but also the weeks that followed. So ultimately what they were able to do is overwhelm the Israelis. Hamas were able to coordinate their attack across the Gaza Strip from north to south, and basically they had multiple people all working together at the same time in order to create this unified front. But as Israel was able to progress in the war, they were able to dismantle the leadership, so eliminate the likes of Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar. But then in addition to that, they were also able to target many of the different battalions throughout the Gaza Strip in order to weaken the organization as a whole. And what we saw is that while the beginning of the war was very thick and fast with many missiles and many coordinated attacks, this started to diminish. And later on in the war, we saw how you'd have maybe a random missile strike in northern Gaza, whereas a couple of hours later, there might be a random missile strike from southern Gaza. And they really didn't seem to be coordinated very well. And it seemed as if all these different Hamas cells that were scattered all over the place were not only severely weakened, but operating individually, independently of one another. They really were in a sort of silo. And ultimately, this helped Israel a lot because Israel were able to repel the attacks much more easily and effectively because there were fewer attacks that were more spaced out. And thank God for that reason, Israel were able to minimize the number of casualties they had compared to early on in the war. Just like that was the case then, it's also the case now. If Israel can continue to batter the Iranian security establishment along with the United States, it will greatly impact their ability to continue striking Israel, the US, and the Arab Gulf countries. And we're already seeing that happening. We're already seeing how there are not as many red alert sirens across Israel as there were at the start of the war. We're seeing how the ones that are coming are spaced much further apart than at the very beginning of the fight. And it surely does seem that if this sort of momentum can be kept up, Israel and the US will be defeating Iran eventually, whether sooner rather than later, difficult to know, but they will eventually be able to defeat Iran, and perhaps a new regime will be able to finally come into power. Thank you very much for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.